James Carter stepped out of his old pickup truck and onto the cracked pavement of a bustling car dealership in Austin, Texas. The sun hung high in the sky, casting long shadows across rows of shiny vehicles lined up like soldiers ready for inspection. James had been thinking about this day for weeks. After years of saving money from his job as a mechanic and his service in the Navy SEALs, he was finally ready to buy himself a new truck. He wanted something reliable, sturdy enough to handle both city streets and rugged terrains, and maybe even a little stylish too. He adjusted his baseball cap, smoothed down his t-shirt, and walked toward the entrance with a calm confidence. His hands were calloused from years of working on engines, but today they weren't greasy or stained. He'd made sure of that. Today wasn't just another trip to the garage. It was a step toward treating himself after years of hard work. But as soon as he stepped inside, he could feel eyes on him. Not the curious glances of someone wondering what kind of car he might be interested in, but rather the dismissive looks people give when they think you don't belong. The showroom buzzed with activity. Salespeople moved around, chatting with customers who wore suits and expensive watches. Families inspected SUVs while their kids played nearby. In one corner, an older couple sat at a table, reviewing paperwork with a smiling salesman. James stood there for a moment, taking it all in. Then he approached the front desk where a young man named Ryan was scrolling through his phone, barely paying attention to the world around him. "Excuse me," James said politely, his deep voice cutting through the hum of conversation. Ryan looked up quickly, startled, then gave James a quick once-over. From the way James was dressed, jeans, sneakers, and a plain black t-shirt, Ryan seemed to make up his mind almost instantly. This guy probably wasn't here to buy anything serious. Maybe he just wanted to look around or ask questions he couldn't afford answers to. "Can I help you?" Ryan asked, his tone flat and uninterested. "I'm looking for a truck," James replied, unfazed by the lack of enthusiasm. "Something reliable, four-wheel drive, good gas mileage if possible." Ryan leaned back slightly in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest. "What's your price range?" he asked, his eyebrow raised as though he already knew the answer. Wouldn't be impressive. James hesitated for only a second before responding. "I haven't decided yet. I want to see what's available first." That was apparently the wrong thing to say. Ryan's expression shifted ever so slightly, a mix of annoyance and condescension creeping into his features. "Well, sir, most of our trucks start pretty high. If you're not sure about your budget, it might be better to come back when you've got more details figured out." James frowned. He hadn't expected to be turned away so easily. Sure, he wasn't dressed like the other customers wandering around the showroom, but he'd assumed that wouldn't matter. After all, he'd earned every penny he planned to spend here. Still, he tried again, hoping to get a clearer picture of what the dealership had to offer. "What do you have in terms of models? Something like a Ford F-150, maybe?" Ryan sighed audibly, tapping his pen against the desk. "Look, those kinds of trucks are premium. They're not exactly beginner-friendly, if you know what I mean." The word stung, though James didn't let it show. He nodded slowly, trying to keep his composure. "Okay, thanks for your time." As James turned to leave, Ryan muttered something under his breath to a coworker standing nearby. James caught the tail end of it. "Not even worth it." It took everything in him not to react. Instead, he kept walking, his jaw clenched tight. Once outside, he climbed back into his truck and gripped the steering wheel, staring straight ahead without starting the engine. He felt angry, yes, but also frustrated and disappointed. He'd worked so hard to get to this point, to save enough money to treat himself to something nice, and now he was being treated like he didn't deserve it. Later that evening, James met up with his childhood friend Lisa Bennett at a small cafe downtown. The two had known each other since grade school, and Lisa had always been the kind of person who listened carefully and offered sound advice. Over cups of coffee, James recounted the entire incident at the dealership. At first, Lisa was quiet, her brow furrowed as she absorbed the details. By the time he finished, her expression had turned fierce. "That's ridiculous," she said firmly, setting her cup down on the table. "You can't let them get away with that. It's discrimination, plain and simple." James shrugged, running a hand over his short-cropped hair. "I don't want to cause trouble. It's just one guy being rude, no big deal. But Lisa wasn't convinced. As a lawyer specializing in discrimination cases, she'd seen situations like this before. People judged based on appearances, denied opportunities because someone decided they weren't the right type of customer. She leaned forward, her voice softening but still carrying weight. It is a big deal, James. You worked hard for that money. You deserve to be treated with respect no matter what you're wearing or how you look. And besides, she added with a sly grin, you're forgetting something pretty important. James raised an eyebrow. What's that? You're a Navy SEAL, Lisa reminded him. If these people knew who you really were, they'd be falling all over themselves trying to sell you a car. James chuckled despite himself. Yeah, well, I'm not exactly advertising that part of my life. Lisa shook her head, exasperated but smiling. Still, we should do something about this. At the very least, you shouldn't let them win. James thought about it for a moment. Part of him wanted to move on, to chalk it up to a bad experience and forget about it. But another part, a bigger part, felt unsettled. He didn't like the idea of letting someone else's prejudice define how he felt about himself. Maybe Lisa was right, maybe this wasn't just about buying a truck. Maybe it was about standing up for what was fair. By the time they left the cafe, James hadn't made any firm decisions. But as he drove home, the wheels in his mind began to turn. Little did he know, the story was far from over. What started as a frustrating encounter at a car dealership would soon spiral into something much larger. Something that would challenge not only the people involved, but also the way they saw themselves and each other. The next morning, Lisa Bennett arrived at her office early, still thinking about James's story from the night before. She couldn't shake the frustration she felt on his behalf. As a lawyer who specialized in discrimination cases, she'd seen plenty of examples of people being treated unfairly because of how they looked or what others assumed about them, but this situation hit close to home. James wasn't just any client, he was her friend, someone she admired for his hard work and quiet strength. The idea that he had been dismissed so casually made her blood boil. While sipping her coffee and going over some paperwork, Lisa heard a knock at her door. It was Mike Dawson, one of her regular clients and the regional manager of several car dealerships in the area, including the very one where James had been mistreated. Mike was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a friendly demeanor, always quick with a smile or a joke. He often came to Lisa for legal advice related to business operations, and their professional relationship had grown into a casual friendship over time. "Morning, Lisa," Mike said as he stepped inside, holding a folder under his arm. "Got a minute?" "Sure thing, Mike," Lisa replied, gesturing toward the chair across from her desk. "What's up?" Mike sat down and opened the folder, pulling out a few documents. But instead of diving straight into business, he paused, looking thoughtful. "Actually, I wanted to ask you something personal. You mentioned yesterday that you were working on a case involving discrimination, right?" Lisa nodded, curious about where this was going. "Yeah, why?" "Well," Mike began, leaning forward slightly, "I've been hearing rumors about some issues at one of my dealerships, complaints about staff treating customers poorly based on appearances. I haven't been able to confirm anything yet, but it's got me worried. If you have any insights or tips, I'd appreciate it." Lisa hesitated for a moment. Normally, she wouldn't share details about someone else's situation without permission. But this felt different. Mike clearly cared about addressing the problem, and if anyone could make a real change, it was him. Plus, James hadn't explicitly asked her to keep his story private. "I do know about a specific incident," Lisa said carefully. "A friend of mine went to one of your dealerships recently. He's African American, and he was basically turned away because the salesperson assumed he couldn't afford anything." Mike's expression darkened. "That's unacceptable. Do you mind telling me which dealership it happened at?" "It was the one on Oak Street," Lisa replied. "The guy's name is Ryan. My friend said he didn't even try to hide his attitude." Mike sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. "That's disappointing to hear. I'll look into it immediately. Did your friend want to file a complaint or take any action?" Lisa shook her head. "Not really. He's not the type to cause a scene. but I think it's important that something is done, not just for him, but for everyone else who might face the same treatment. Mike agreed wholeheartedly. Absolutely. Discrimination has no place in my dealerships or anywhere else for that matter. Thanks for letting me know, Lisa. I'll handle this personally. Later that afternoon, Mike paid an unannounced visit to the Oak Street dealership. He parked his car in the back lot, away from the main entrance, and entered through a side door, reserved for employees. His plan was simple. Observe the staff interacting with customers without drawing attention to himself. If there was truth to Lisa's claims, he wanted to see it firsthand. As he wandered through the showroom, Mike kept a low profile, pretending to browse vehicles while keeping an eye on the sales team. Most of the interactions seemed normal enough. Polite greetings, friendly conversations, and genuine efforts to assist potential buyers. But then he noticed Ryan standing near the front desk, talking to a middle-aged woman dressed in modest clothing. The woman appeared hesitant, glancing at a compact sedan while clutching her purse tightly. Ryan's body language spoke volumes. He stood with his arms crossed, barely making eye contact with the customer. When she asked a question about financing options, he gave a dismissive shrug and muttered something vague about credit requirements. The woman frowned, clearly uncomfortable, and quickly excused herself, heading toward the exit. Mike watched the exchange with growing concern. This wasn't just poor customer service, it was outright disrespect. And it wasn't the first red flag he'd noticed during his brief visit. Determined to dig deeper, Mike decided to call for a mandatory team meeting later that week. He needed to address these issues head-on and remind everyone of the company's values. When the day of the meeting arrived, Mike gathered the entire staff in the dealership's conference room. The atmosphere was tense. Most employees knew something was up, though no one dared to ask questions aloud. Once everyone was seated, Mike took his place at the front of the room and cleared his throat. "Thanks for coming today," he began, his tone serious but measured. "I'm here because I've received reports about some troubling behavior among our team. Specifically, complaints about certain staff members treating customers unfairly based on assumptions about their appearance or financial status." A murmur rippled through the room, but Mike held up a hand to silence it. "Let me give you an example. Last week we had a customer come in looking for a truck. He was polite, respectful, and clearly interested in making a purchase. But instead of helping him, one of our salespeople brushed him off, assuming he couldn't afford anything." Mike paused, scanning the faces in front of him. Some employees shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others avoided eye contact altogether. Finally, Ryan raised his hand cautiously. "That was me," Ryan admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. He didn't seem like the kind of person who would buy a premium vehicle." His admission hung in the air, heavy and awkward. Mike nodded slowly, acknowledging Ryan's honesty but clearly disappointed. "And did it occur to you to treat him like any other customer? To ask questions, offer assistance, and let him decide what he could or couldn't afford?" Ryan looked down at his lap, unable to respond. Mike continued, his voice firm, but not harsh. "Here's the thing, folks. That man you turned away, his name is James Carter. Not only is he a highly skilled mechanic, but he's also a decorated Navy SEAL. He served our country with honor and courage, putting his life on the line to protect people like us. And yet, he walked out of this dealership feeling humiliated, all because someone judged him based on how he looked." The room fell silent. A few jaws dropped and others exchanged guilty glances. No one expected the unassuming mechanic to be a national hero. For Ryan, the revelation hit especially hard. He slumped in his seat, visibly shaken by the weight of what he'd done. Mike let the information sink in before continuing. "This isn't just about James, it's about every single person who walks through our doors. Our job is to provide excellent service to everyone regardless of their background, appearance, or circumstances. We owe it to our customers and to ourselves to do better." As the meeting wrapped up, Mike handed out flyers outlining new training programs designed to promote inclusivity and improve customer relations. He emphasized that accountability would be key moving forward. Anyone caught engaging in discriminatory behavior would face immediate consequences, including possible termination. Afterward, Mike pulled Ryan aside for a private conversation. "I know you didn't mean to hurt anyone," he said gently. "But actions have consequences, and it's important to own up to your mistakes. What are you going to do to make things right?" Ryan swallowed hard, his face pale. I don't know. But I'll figure it out." Mike nodded approvingly. "Good. Start by apologizing directly to James. Show him that you're willing to learn and grow from this experience. That's the first step." Meanwhile, Lisa called James to update him on what had happened. She explained how Mike had taken action and promised to hold the dealership accountable. James listened quietly, processing everything she said. "I don't need an apology," he told her when she finished. "But if it helps prevent this from happening to someone else, then maybe it's worth it." Lisa smiled softly. "You're a better person than most, James. Just remember, you deserve respect no matter what anyone assumes about you." James thanked her and hung up, feeling a mix of emotions. Part of him still wished none of this had happened, but another part, a stronger part, felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this experience could lead to something positive, something bigger than himself. Ryan spent the rest of the day after the meeting feeling like a weight had been dropped onto his shoulders. He couldn't stop thinking about what Mike had said, about James Carter being a Navy SEAL, about how he'd judged someone so unfairly, and about the fact that his actions had hurt a person who deserved nothing but respect. It wasn't just guilt gnawing at him. It was shame. Ryan had always thought of himself as a decent guy, someone who worked hard and treated others fairly. But now, faced with the truth of what he'd done, he realized how wrong he'd been. The next morning, Ryan decided to take Mike's advice and reach out to James directly. He didn't know where to start, though. The idea of apologizing to a Navy SEAL, a man who had risked his life for the country, felt overwhelming. What could he possibly say to make things right? After pacing back and forth in his apartment for nearly an hour, Ryan finally mustered the courage to call the dealership's main office and ask for James's contact information. To his surprise, Mike already had everything arranged. James owned a small auto repair shop downtown, and Mike gave Ryan the address along with some final words of encouragement. "Just be honest," Mike told him. "Tell him exactly how you feel and don't try to make excuses. People appreciate sincerity." With that, Ryan climbed into his car and drove to James's repair shop. The place was tucked away on a quiet side street, surrounded by other small businesses. A faded sign above the garage door read, "Carter's Auto Repair," and a few cars were parked outside, waiting to be fixed. Ryan took a deep breath before stepping out of his vehicle and walking toward the open bay doors. Inside, James was bent over the hood of a sedan, his hands covered in grease as he worked on the engine. He glanced up briefly when he heard footsteps, then did a double take as he recognized Ryan. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Ryan stood awkwardly near the entrance, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, while James wiped his hands on a rag and studied him with a calm but unreadable expression. "Can I help you?" James asked, his tone neutral. Ryan swallowed hard, feeling sweat bead on his forehead despite the cool air inside the garage. Yeah. Hi. My name's Ryan. I work at the dealership where you came in last week." James nodded slowly, still watching him closely. "I remember." Ryan hesitated, unsure of how to begin. Every word felt heavy, like it might come out wrong no matter what he said. Finally, he blurted out, "Look, I'm really sorry about how I treated you. I shouldn't have assumed anything about you or dismissed you like that. It was completely unprofessional and, well, I feel terrible about it." To Ryan's relief, James didn't interrupt or snap at him. Instead, he listened quietly, his arms crossed over his chest. When Ryan paused, struggling to find the right words, James simply nodded again. "I understand," James said evenly. "People make assumptions all the time. Doesn't mean it doesn't sting, though." Ryan winced at the comment, knowing it was true. "Yeah, I get that. and I want you to know I'm trying to learn from this. I never meant to disrespect you. I just messed up big time." James studied him for a long moment, his dark eyes thoughtful. Then he sighed softly and uncrossed his arms. "You're here now, trying to fix it. That counts for something." Ryan looked surprised, almost hopeful. "So, you're not mad?" James chuckled lightly, shaking his head. "Mad? No. Disappointed, maybe. But anger doesn't solve much. What matters is whether people are willing to change. Are you?" Ryan nodded quickly, his voice firmer this time. "Yes, absolutely. I don't ever want to treat someone like that again." James smiled faintly, a hint of warmth breaking through his guarded demeanor. "Good. Start by treating everyone the same way you'd want to be treated, simple as that." The two men talked for a little while longer, with Ryan asking questions about James's work and sharing a bit about his own life. By the end of the conversation, Ryan felt lighter, as if a burden had been lifted off his chest. He thanked James sincerely before leaving, promising to do better moving forward. Meanwhile, Mike had arranged for James to return to the dealership, not to confront anyone, but to give him the opportunity to see the changes being made firsthand. When James arrived later that week, he was greeted warmly by Mike himself, who shook his hand and apologized once again for the earlier incident. "We owe you an apology, Mr. Carter," Mike said earnestly. "What happened here was unacceptable, and I assure you it won't happen again. We're implementing new training programs and holding staff accountable for their actions. You deserve better than what you experienced." James appreciated the gesture but remained modest. "Thanks for saying that. I hope this helps others too." Mike smiled gratefully. "It will. In fact, I'd like to offer you something special today. Consider it a token of goodwill." With that, he led James to a row of trucks parked near the front of the showroom. Among them was a sleek black Ford F-150, gleaming under the showroom lights. "This is one of our top models," Mike explained. "We'd like to extend a special discount to you, along with free maintenance for the first year. It's the least we can do." James raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed by the truck but hesitant to accept such a generous offer. "That's very kind of you, but I don't need charity." "It's not charity," Mike insisted. "Think of it as a thank you for your service, for bringing this issue to light, and for giving us a chance to make things right." After a moment of consideration, James accepted the offer. He knew it wasn't just about him. It was about setting an example and showing that even big companies could admit their mistakes and grow from them. As James finalized the paperwork for his new truck, he couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. From the initial dismissal at the dealership to the heartfelt apology from Ryan, the experience had taught him a lot about human nature. People weren't perfect, but they could change if given the chance. And sometimes, standing up for yourself, even quietly, could inspire others to do the same. By the time James drove his new truck off the lot, news of the incident had spread throughout the dealership. Employees whispered about the Navy SEAL who had been mistreated, and how his story had sparked meaningful change within the company. Some, like Ryan, vowed to approach every customer with kindness and respect, no matter what they looked like or how they dressed. Others began attending the new training sessions with renewed determination to improve their skills and attitudes. For James, the ordeal was finally behind him. He returned to his repair shop with a sense of closure and a reminder that even the smallest actions could have a ripple effect. As he worked on engines and helped customers in the days that followed, he carried the lesson with him. Respect isn't earned by appearances. It's given freely, and it starts with each of us. Weeks passed, and life seemed to settle into a new rhythm for everyone involved in the incident at the dealership. For James Carter, the memory of being dismissed because of his appearance still lingered, but it no longer weighed heavily on him. Instead, he chose to focus on the positive changes that had come from the experience. His new truck was everything he'd hoped for: reliable, sturdy, and perfect for both work and weekend adventures. More importantly, though, the situation had sparked something bigger than himself, a shift in how people thought about respect and fairness. At the dealership, Ryan worked tirelessly to prove that he had learned from his mistake. He attended every training session Mike organized, soaking up lessons about inclusivity, empathy, and active listening. At first, some of his coworkers teased him lightly, calling him the reformed snob, or joking that he'd become too serious. But as they saw the genuine effort Ryan put into improving his interactions with customers, their teasing turned into admiration. Ryan even started mentoring newer salespeople, sharing stories about his own missteps and emphasizing the importance of treating everyone equally. One day, a young couple walked into the showroom, clearly nervous about buying their first car. They wore simple clothes and carried a baby in a stroller, glancing around like they didn't quite belong. When Ryan approached them with a warm smile and asked how he could help, they looked surprised but grateful. By the end of the visit, not only had they purchased a compact SUV, but they also left glowing reviews online about the excellent service they'd received. It was a small victory, but for Ryan, it felt monumental. Each positive interaction reminded him of why he'd chosen this line of work in the first place, to connect with people and help them find what they needed. Mike, meanwhile, took pride in seeing the transformation within his team. The mandatory training sessions had gone beyond surface-level improvements. They had fostered real conversations about bias and accountability. Employees began holding each other responsible for maintaining high standards of customer service. If someone noticed a colleague slipping back into old habits, they gently called them out. The culture of the dealership shifted from one focused solely on sales numbers to one centered on building trust and relationships. Lisa kept tabs on the progress too, checking in occasionally with Mike and James to see how things were going. She was pleased to hear about the changes and proud of the role she'd played in bringing attention to the issue. Her friendship with James grew stronger during this time, as they often met for coffee or dinner to catch up. One evening, over plates of barbecue ribs at their favorite spot, Lisa brought up an idea she'd been thinking about. "You know," she said, wiping her hands on a napkin, "your story could inspire a lot of people. Have you ever thought about sharing it publicly?" James frowned slightly, leaning back in his chair. "What do you mean? Like giving interviews or something?" Lisa nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. There are so many folks out there who face discrimination every day, whether it's based on race, gender, income, or anything else. Hearing your story might give them hope and remind them that they're not alone." James hesitated, rubbing the side of his glass thoughtfully. He wasn't someone who craved the spotlight, and the idea of telling his story to strangers made him uncomfortable. Still, he couldn't deny that Lisa had a point. If his experience could help others feel seen and valued, maybe it was worth stepping outside his comfort zone. "I'll think about it," he said, finally offering her a small smile. "But don't expect me to become some big motivational speaker overnight." Lisa laughed, raising her glass. "Deal. Baby steps." True to his word, James did consider Lisa's suggestion. Over the next few weeks, he found himself reflecting on moments in his life when he'd faced prejudice, not just at the dealership but throughout his career as a mechanic and Navy SEAL. He realized that while those experiences had been painful, they had also shaped him into the person he was today, resilient, compassionate, and determined to treat others with dignity. Encouraged by Lisa, James decided to start small. He agreed to speak at a local community event hosted by a nonprofit organization dedicated to fighting discrimination. The group's leader, a kind woman named Karen, reached out to James personally, assuring him that his presence would mean a great deal to attendees. "We're not asking you to be anyone other than yourself," she told him. "Just share your truth." On the night of the event, James stood backstage, nervously adjusting his tie. The auditorium buzzed with energy as people filed in, taking their seats. Lisa gave him a reassuring pat on the shoulder before heading to her seat in the audience. When Karen introduced him, James walked onto the stage to polite applause, his heart pounding in his chest. "Good evening," he began, gripping the microphone stand. His voice was steady, though quieter than usual. "My name is James Carter, and I'm here tonight to talk about something we've all probably experienced at some point: being judged unfairly." He paused, scanning the crowd. Some faces were curious, others sympathetic. Taking a deep breath, he continued. "A few months ago, I went to a car dealership looking to buy a truck. I saved up for years to afford it, but instead of being treated like a potential customer, I was dismissed because of how I looked. I wasn't wearing a suit or driving a fancy car. To the salesperson, I didn't fit the image of someone who could afford what they were selling. The room was silent now, every eye on James. He shifted slightly, finding comfort in the familiar weight of honesty. At first I was angry, then I was disappointed. But eventually I realized that this wasn't just about me. It was about a pattern of behavior, a way of seeing people through stereotypes instead of getting to know them as individuals. James went on to describe what happened after the incident, Ryan's apology, Mike's efforts to improve the dealership, and the ripple effect those actions had created. He spoke candidly about his own struggles with prejudice, both in civilian life and during his time as a Navy SEAL. And he ended with a message of hope, urging listeners to challenge their assumptions and advocate for fairness wherever they could. When he finished speaking, the audience erupted into applause. People stood, clapping and cheering, as James stepped away from the podium. Backstage, Lisa greeted him with tears in her eyes. "You did amazing," she whispered, pulling him into a hug. Over the following weeks, James received messages from people who had attended the event or heard about it through social media. Many thanked him for sharing his story, saying it inspired them to stand up against discrimination in their own lives. Local newspapers wrote articles about his speech, highlighting the broader impact of his message. Even the dealership where the incident had occurred reached out to feature James in a promotional campaign aimed at showcasing their commitment to inclusivity. Through it all, James remained humble. He didn't seek recognition or praise. His goal was simply to make a difference. And in doing so, he discovered something powerful. Change doesn't always require grand gestures. Sometimes it starts with one person deciding to speak up and others choosing to listen. As autumn turned to winter, James returned to his routine at the repair shop, fixing engines and chatting with customers. Life hadn't changed dramatically for him. He still preferred quiet evenings at home over flashy events. But he carried a renewed sense of purpose. Every time someone mentioned his speech or thanked him for inspiring them, he felt a quiet pride. Not because he'd done something extraordinary, but because he'd shown that ordinary actions could lead to extraordinary outcomes. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson of all, that kindness, respect, and courage weren't reserved for heroes. They belonged to everyone willing to practice them. As the months rolled by, James Carter's life settled into a comfortable rhythm. His days were filled with the familiar sounds of wrenches turning, engines revving, and customers chatting about their cars. The repair shop became busier than ever, thanks in part to the growing reputation James had earned, not just as a skilled mechanic, but as someone who treated everyone with respect. People from all walks of life came to Carter's Auto Repair, knowing they'd be greeted warmly and listened to without judgment. James didn't change much about his daily routine. He still woke up early, drank his coffee black, and worked long, hours under the hood of whatever vehicle needed fixing. But there was a subtle difference now. Every time he interacted with a customer, he found himself reflecting on the lessons he'd learned from his experience at the dealership. He made it a point to listen carefully, ask thoughtful questions, and treat each person as an individual, rather than making assumptions based on appearances. It wasn't always easy. Some customers were difficult or demanding, but James approached every situation with patience and understanding. One afternoon, a young man named Ethan walked into the shop looking nervous. He carried a folder stuffed with papers and seemed unsure of where to start. When James greeted him, Ethan hesitated before explaining that he was trying to start his own business delivering packages but couldn't afford a reliable van. His old car kept breaking down and he was desperate for help. James nodded sympathetically. "Let's take a look at what you've got," he said, leading Ethan outside to inspect the vehicle. After diagnosing the problem, a blown transmission, he sat down with Ethan to discuss options. Buying a new van was out of the question, so James offered a solution. He would repair Ethan's car at cost, using discounted parts from suppliers he trusted. It wasn't a permanent fix, but it would keep Ethan on the road long enough to save for something better. Ethan left the shop that day overwhelmed with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, shaking James's hand firmly. Most people wouldn't go this far for someone like me. James smiled softly. Everyone deserves a fair shot. Just pay it forward when you can. At the dealership, Ryan continued to grow into his role as a salesperson and mentor. The changes Mike had implemented weren't just surface level. They had reshaped the entire culture of the workplace. Employees held monthly meetings to discuss ways they could improve customer service and address any biases they noticed in themselves or others. Ryan often led these discussions, sharing stories about his journey and encouraging his coworkers to reflect on their own behaviors. One day, a middle-aged woman named Patricia visited the dealership, hoping to trade in her aging sedan for something more fuel-efficient. She wore jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. When Ryan approached her, she looked surprised by his friendly demeanor. "I wasn't sure anyone would take me seriously," she admitted. "I've been to other places where they acted like I didn't belong here." Ryan shook his head, genuinely upset by her words. "That's not okay. You deserve to be treated with respect no matter where you go." He spent the next hour walking Patricia through different models, answering her questions patiently, and helping her find a car that fit both her needs and her budget. By the time she drove off the lot in her new compact hybrid, she felt valued in a way she hadn't expected. Later that week, Mike called Ryan into his office. "I heard about your work with Patricia," he said, smiling proudly. "She sent us a thank you note saying you went above and beyond. Keep it up." Ryan nodded, feeling a sense of accomplishment he hadn't experienced before. Helping people wasn't just part of the job, it was becoming his passion. Lisa Bennett watched all of this unfold with quiet satisfaction. As a lawyer, she had seen countless cases of discrimination, many of which ended bitterly or unresolved. But this story was different. It wasn't just about holding someone accountable, it was about creating lasting change. Lisa stayed in touch, with James checking in regularly to see how things were going. Their friendship deepened over shared meals and conversations about justice, equality, and the power of kindness. One evening, as they sat together at a cozy diner, Lisa brought up another idea. "You've inspired so many people already," she said, stirring her tea. "What if we took it a step further? What if we created a program to teach kids about fairness and empathy?" James raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Like a workshop or something?" "Exactly," Lisa replied. "We could partner with schools and community centers, using real-life examples to show students how small actions can make a big difference. Who better to lead it than you?" James chuckled nervously. "Me? I'm just a mechanic." "You're also a Navy SEAL, a speaker, and a role model," Lisa countered. "Think about it. If even one kid learns to treat others with respect because of your story, isn't that worth it?" After some thought, James agreed to explore the idea. Together, Lisa and James drafted a proposal and presented it to local organizations. To their delight, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Within weeks, they secured funding and began planning workshops that combined storytelling, interactive activities, and group discussions. James loved seeing the enthusiasm on the kids' faces as they talked about standing up for what was right. By spring, the impact of James's efforts had spread far beyond Austin. Articles about his speech and the subsequent initiatives appeared in national publications, drawing attention to the importance of combating discrimination. Other dealerships reached out to Mike, asking for advice on implementing similar training programs. Schools across Texas adopted the workshops James and Lisa had developed, incorporating them into their curriculums. Despite the growing recognition, James remained grounded. He declined offers to appear on television or write a book, preferring to focus on the work that mattered most to him: repairing cars, mentoring young people, and advocating for fairness in his community. For James, success wasn't measured by fame or wealth, it was measured by the connections he built and the lives he touched. One sunny Saturday morning, James stood outside his repair shop, watching as a group of teenagers painted a mural on the side of the building. The artwork depicted hands of different colors reaching out to one another, symbolizing unity and understanding. Lisa joined him, handing him a cup of coffee. "They're doing a great job," she said, gesturing toward the mural. James nodded, smiling faintly. Yeah, they are. Makes me hopeful, you know? Seeing them reminds me that the future's in good hands. Lisa glanced at him, her expression softening. And it's partly because of you. Don't forget that. James shrugged modestly. All I did was try to do the right thing. Turns out that's enough sometimes. As the day wore on, the mural took shape, vibrant and full of life. Passers-by stopped to admire it, snapping photos and chatting with the teens. James stood back, observing the scene with quiet pride. He knew the world still had its share of challenges, but moments like this reminded him that progress was possible. One act of kindness, one conversation, one lesson at a time. In the end, James's story wasn't just about overcoming prejudice. It was about resilience, redemption, and the enduring power of human connection. And though he never sought the spotlight, his actions proved that even the simplest gestures could spark meaningful change. For James Carter, that was more than enough.